Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you may be watching on, and for most of those platforms, they will show up here in my chat room. And I hope you're having a lovely day, and we're starting a new week. And here in central Illinois, the temperatures are rising, which gives me great pleasure because being an older person, I definitely feel those colder temperatures. Today, we are currently at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is wonderful news, considering that just a few days ago we were um, under 20. So um, I realize this is not necessarily the end of bad weather for the year, but it's a very welcome relief. I understand the whole weekend is, or the whole week is supposed to be good in terms of temperature, and I'm looking forward to that. Hello to Reverend Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you, Michael. So, if you have been waiting on Reverend Don's Book of Stones, Metals, and Crystals, and hello to Reverend Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. Um, if you've been waiting for your copy of Reverend Don's Stones, Metals, and Crystals, it is now on the way. If you ordered a digital copy, you may already have it. If not, I would expect you would get it during the course of the day. And hello to Corey Judy in the chat room. It's good to see you, Corey. Um, and Corey says, "Greetings, Reverend Don Lewis. I missed you." Well, it's good to see you. Um, the hard copies have been ordered. As soon as they get to us, I will sign them and send them out. Hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you. I'm very pleased with how the book ended up. I'm starting the next book, um, actually a couple of books. We'll have news for you about those here presently. And uh, my subject for today is to talk about the examples of important people I've known in life. And I came to this partly through finishing up the book. I dedicated the book of Reverend Don's book of Stones, Metals, and Crystals to Marlena the Rock Lady and Terry the Stone Lady, two wonderful people from whom I learned a great deal about the metaphysical purposes of stones and how to relate to them. Not the only people I've ever learned from, but two important ones. And in fact, I learned many things from both of these people. And I thought, I've talked previously about being a good example, about choosing your battles and um, finding the right way to make a better world. I thought today I'd talk about some people who I feel actually did a very good job building a better world. Marlena the Rock Lady is one of them. You have probably never heard of Marlena the Rock Lady unless you're from Northern Illinois um, and of a certain age, or you've heard me talk about her. But Marlena the Rock Lady was a prominent psychic in the 1970s and 80s, and she read stones specifically. She also wrote Marlena the Rock Lady's Book of Stones, although I don't swear I remember the name correctly, as it was some 30 years ago. And I illustrated this book for her. And she had come from a very interesting background. Hello to Janet Winston in the chat room. It's good to see you, Janet. And she led a very interesting life. She was the daughter of an evangelical minister, or a fundamentalist minister, I think is the better term for it. Hello to Bimby in the chat room. And she and her family had made a career in gospel music. Her husband was the Reverend Jim Berndt. And when I had occasion to visit their home, one of the interesting things that what was part of the decoration were the posters from their career as a gospel singing group. And hello to Arlene in the chat room. It's good to see you, Arlene. What makes that interesting is that when I knew these people, they were running psychic fairs and very much part of the New Age movement and heavily employing pagan psychics as well, and having no problem with any of this, which, considering their background, I always thought was a little remarkable. Um, and we I worked for them at J&M Psychic Fair Circuit um, back in the day, and um, yeah, they were one of the major employers of psychics in northern Illinois and northern Indiana at that time. We would do a psychic fair in a different city every week, and Marlena read stones. She also sold stones, and she and her husband ran the fair. And there are a lot of interesting stories around Marlena. Um, and one of them has to do with how she came out to her family about her interest in psychic things. She had spent some time becoming interested in psychic work, um, in the metaphysical meanings and qualities of stones and how to read them. Hello to Magical Mermaid in the chat room. But as far as she knew, her family were all these conservative Christians, and she was very worried about sharing this with them. But she had become so well known that she did a radio interview back in the days when that was still a big thing. And she realized, I'd better sit my daughters down and have this conversation with them so that if they hear about this, they won't be surprised. So she sat her four daughters down and explained to them that over the last few years she had gotten involved in psychic things and become a professional psychic and even become relatively well known in certain circles. And they might hear about this soon because she was doing this interview. And she did not feel that this was any sort of conflict with her spirituality. She felt that all these things had their equivalent in biblical belief. And um, then in the end, when she'd finished explaining it all to them, she waited in fear for their response. And they looked at one another and said, "Mother, we're so glad to hear this because we've been into this for years." And it turned out the entire family had separately become interested in New Age metaphysics. And they pivoted from being a gospel singing group to the leading psychic family of Illinois. It was quite remarkable. And it was a very interesting voyage to go on. I had previously worked for D&H Psychic Fairs, which was run um, by two ladies out of central Illinois who were spiritualists. And they were a very homespun kind of psychic fair. Very earnest, very spiritualist, um, very laid back. And J&M Psychic Fairs was definitely a business. Um, and they took the business aspect seriously because they had to. You can't run that size of an enterprise if you don't take it seriously. And that is probably the number one lesson I really learned from Marlena. And if there were any lesson that I think I would like to share with the pagan community, that would be it. Um, that you can't really do things at a large scale if you're not willing to do it in a practical way. In order to be able to do a different psychic fair in a different city every week of the year, and sometimes they would even split and have two cities at once, it took a lot of organization. Also took a lot of money and very good financial management. And um, it was quite the operation to watch and to learn from. And over the years, I've had a number of people make wild financial accusations in my direction. But the truth of the matter is, I learned how to manage money well, in part from working with J&M Fairs. And the total absence of any actual problem should be the proof of that. Um, there are people out there who've tried to spread all kinds of rumors, but if you look at the actuality, there's never been a problem because I've always applied the lessons I learned early in life about how to do this right. And a lot of people in the pagan community don't have a clue. of how to do it right. Just like copyright, a lot of people in the pagan community do not understand copyright and have woefully misguided ideas about it, and then get really surprised when they find out it doesn't actually work that way. You cannot run a business without money. You cannot run a major operation without raising money. It's absolutely necessary. And the truth is, there's rarely much of a profit. Um, and if you're a not for profit, there's not a profit at all. That's not what you're there for, but you must have that income if you're going to survive. It's like when we were running Witch School, the servers and the programming and other things that kept that site going cost hundreds of dollars a month every month. The cost for the websites, the website names, you may not realize it, but every URL has a price tag attached to it that has to be paid on a regular basis. But this is the kind of thing that was very much in evidence with Jim and Marlena at J&M fairs. A lot of the psychics who didn't really understand how finances work thought that they were overly concerned with it. Um, but they were not. You must be concerned with it, and you must know what you're doing, or you're going to run into problems. And I can very proudly say that I have never run into any problems. Now, Magical Mermaid says, do you think artificial intelligence will be used in the pagan community? Absolutely. It already is. You regularly see people complaining about books that they find on Amazon that were written by AI. Um, Obviously, there'll be more of that. But hopefully, people will use it in responsible ways. AI is a very useful tool. It can do a lot of things in the realm of being an executive assistant that would make things much easier for running any large organization. And one of the things I've seen again and again in the pagan community is a large organization where everything basically comes down to just one person or maybe two people who have to do everything, and maybe a group of volunteers who are somewhat reliable. But add AI into that, and you can get things running a lot more smoothly if you have it doing, for want of a better way to put it, the donkey work. I think that it will be a very useful addition to the tools that people are using. I know that a lot of people have a lot of fear about AI. I don't personally think that that is necessary. I will grant you it's going to cause some disruptions and already has, but that's true for any technological change. And we have to expect that, but we can use it to our betterment. And we need to remember that as thinking beings, it is we who are using it, and we need to approach it in that way. And if we do so, it will work well for us. I also already am using AI myself and people I work with in a variety of ways. For example, if you watch the Black Moon ritual a couple of months ago, the entire thing was animated, and a lot of that animation used AI animating programs. It could never have been done so quickly without those programs. And in fact, one of my other interests that I'm hoping to eventually get back to is puppetry. And the kind of puppetry that I like to work with is stop motion animation. But AI will be very helpful in speeding up the process of doing that. A few years ago, to do that, any speaking part had to be hand animated, which isn't necessarily true now. Um, and that makes a big difference in the ability to do it. And that can bring creativity to areas where people were not previously able to express it. I thought the Black Moon ritual, in which different people were animated into their parts, was a very creative undertaking. And I expect we'll do a little bit more of that, maybe with a little wider variation at some point in the future, because it allows a physicalization of what would otherwise be done through visualization. One of the things in a lot of rituals that I do are guided visualizations. I think that to be able to animate those could be helpful. Um, so these are some of the things I think we'll see. But the other thing that artificial intelligence can do is that it can help with the preparation for any number of different things that need to be done. And I think that's very beneficial. Um, I think that having AI writing a book from start to finish is not a particularly useful thing, but I think having it uh, to help create the table of contents is not necessarily bad. I think having um, using AI for research is not bad, and particularly when dealing with legal matters. I think already we're seeing the use of AI in the form of answering questions in this kind of situation, which I think will probably be helpful. So, yes, I do think we'll be seeing that used more widely in the pagan community and every other. I don't think there's any other option, really, because when technology changes, it does have its effect, whether people are on board with it or not. And you look through history, you see that again and again. Now, and I'd have to say, one of the stories I like to talk about from Marlena the Rock Lady. One time they were doing a fair in a new city, and they had set up the fair, and the police showed up to inform them that psychic reading was illegal in that community. Now, we can talk about whether that should or should not be the case and blah, 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 but they were right there on the spot. They'd already invested their money in this location. Everyone had come. They had to come up with a solution immediately, and they immediately did. And they decided to stop selling psychic readings that day. Instead, they sold the stones from Marlena's stone stand, and every stone came with a free psychic reading, which was completely legal. That kind of flexibility to meet challenges is very important. It is an important example, and one that I hope that uh, I hope that I learned, and I hope that other people would learn it too. And hello to Mystic Order of the Sacred Circle. It's good to see you. To be able to change and adapt to circumstances like that is very helpful. And we're living in interesting times as Project 2025 goes forward, which I'll remind you I spent last year warning you about. And we may have to have that level of flexibility to find ways to continue doing the things we're accustomed to doing. Um, but there are always ways. There are always things you can do if you look for it, if you're open to it, if you're not hidebound. Unfortunately, a lot of the pagan community is very hidebound. They like to think of themselves as free thinkers, but are very often nothing of the sort. Um, to survive the times that we're in, we need to be able to be free thinkers. We need to be able to change the ways that we do certain things in order to continue doing them. And again, I think of Marlena and that day as a good example, both of how that can come into play unexpectedly and how you can adapt to it suddenly. Another favorite story of mine with Marlena that I often talk about is at one fair, they found themselves being picketed by other psychics who held the point of view that if you wanted a psychic reading, you should not go to a psychic fair. You should go to a home psychic where they could read for you in the comfort of their own home and take all the time they needed, and you'd get a much better reading. And Marlena ultimately invited these people to come and talk with her. And her response to this was, um, I think put a little more diplomatically than I'm going to put it, but anybody can read at home. Anyone can read under ideal circumstances. Psychic fairs are not ideal circumstances. Psychic fairs are reading in the trenches. If you're reading at a psychic fair, there's all kinds of noise around you, all kinds of things happening. You have a limited period of time. And if you can still give a good reading at a psychic fair, you are a very well-trained reader. And in fact, if you want to be a reader, I personally recommend working at a few psychic fairs for exactly this reason, so that you can learn to read under adverse circumstances as well as ideal circumstances. Because, as I often say, The magic is no use if it can't be used when the car is skidding off the road um, and heading into an accident. You have to be able to do it under adverse circumstances in order to have the full advantage of it. Learning how to read in the midst of many distractions was one of the best things that ever happened to me as a psychic. Because if I need to read for someone or for myself, doesn't matter where I am. I already have experience reading under very importunious circumstances. Um, and I can ignore whatever is going on around me to make that change of consciousness to do that psychic reading. And I highly recommend that to anyone. Learn that, as I say, from Marlena the Rock Lady and from her organization. Working for D&H Psychic Fairs, far more relaxed, not nearly as fast moving, not nearly as much distraction, also good training. But to be a trench reader at J&M really was, well, we started the day talking about Rev Don's book of stones, metals, and crystals. And, one of the crystals that I find fascinating and difficult is the diamond. And the diamond is a stone of self-perfection, among other things. A diamond is one of the hardest substances in existence. And it will polish you if you wear it constantly. It will if you are using diamonds, they will help with your self-perception, perfection, and your self-perception. Um, but learning to read in that kind of circumstance was rather that same effect. It could be challenging, it could be difficult, but my goodness, it moved you forward. And I highly recommend it. So those are some of the things I learned from Marlena the Rock Lady. Now, there are a lot of other people I have known that I learned a lot from. And I mentioned also Terry Milton, the Stone Lady. And I also dedicated this book to her. And I learned very different lessons from Terry. From Terry, one of the things I would say about Terry is that she's one of the kindest people I have ever met. And I highly admire that quality in her. And I learned a lot about, well, learned and or reinforced a lot about compassion in knowing her and seeing how she treated people, um, even people who had not necessarily treated her equally well. She was a wonderful, generous spirit, is a wonderful, generous spirit, which is also a very good, important example, in my opinion. Now, we're coming down to the end of our half hour. Um, and so I'll mention some of the usual suspects that have been major influences in my life. I don't talk as often about people like Marlena the Rock Lady as I do about people like Pete Pathfinder Davis and Olivia Robertson. But they were major pagan mentors to me. Pete and I, we met when I started doing illustrations for the Panegyria newsletter through the Aquarian Tabernacle Church back in the 1980s. I did a lot of artwork for them. I did artwork for the newsletter. I did artwork for their Hecate Shrine campaign. I did a lot of pieces for them. And along the way, I got to know Pete quite well. We would talk by phone for several hours at a time, once or more often per month. And I learned a lot from him. The number one thing I learned from Pete, and I tell lots of Pete stories, but the number one thing I learned kind of speaks to something I've already talked about in this half hour, but I'm going to talk about it again, and that's practicality. Pete headed the Aquarian Tabernacle Church. He founded it, and he led it in a very practical, real-world way. One of the reasons that it's still one of the major pagan organizations in the world. He had a background in law and politics and business, and he brought all of these skills to running that organization. He did not have a lot of room for nonsense, and he would call people out on their nonsense if they were if they were behaving impractically. An example of this was, I believe it was the first or second um, Spring Mysteries gathering. And if you're not familiar with the Spring Mysteries gathering, it is a retelling of the story um, of Hades and Persephone in a celebrational way, involving a lot of oracular work. Um, but he said that as they were going through the mysteries that year, and I don't know how much it may have changed since then, um, they came into one of the rooms and found two people in the midst of lovemaking in a ritual context. And he went through the roof because this was a family-friendly event and there were children present, and this was a horrible, horrible idea. Yes, of course, it's a sex-positive religion. Yes, of course, um, the act of copulation is a sacred act. No, it did not belong in the middle of that festival, and he stopped them immediately and shut them down because no theoretical considerations outweighed the inappropriateness of that act in that circumstance. And some of those people were upset with him because they thought, oh, but paganism stands for this and paganism stands for that. And no, it was not standing for it that weekend. And he was, of course, absolutely right because um, even though I don't think there were necessarily children present in the room, but I'm not sure there weren't either. And it was just absolutely not an acceptable thing. So he shut it down. You must. Um, the other story about Pete that I like to talk about, and I'll keep it fairly short because we're coming to the end of our half hour, is he was very big on interfaith language and dialogue. He eventually became the president of the Washington State Interfaith Council. But I learned a lot about interfaith dialogue and presentation from him. And he was very big on presenting himself the way he wanted to be received. One example is that they were having tremendous problems with the electric bill, I believe it was, at the headquarters of the Aquarian Tabernacle Church. This just went on and on. Finally, he made an appointment to go in and talk to them in person. And he made a point to put on his clerical collar and his priest's suit, for want of a better way to put it, before he went in. And he found that they reacted to him very differently than they had up until that time. And everything got cleared up that day because he presented himself as what he was, an archpriest, and was received in that way. And hello to Steve Taylor in the chat room. A very important lesson. Last person I'm going to mention is Olivia Robertson. I often mention Olivia. She was one of the founders of the FOI and a very long-term leader of the FOI, the Fellowship of Isis. Olivia was a gifted medium and oracle, and also an artist and writer, very creative, very beautiful woman, lived to a great age. And I had the privilege to get to know her and to interview her on many occasions. And I learned an awful lot from Olivia also. And one of the things had to do with that issue of presentation. I cannot imagine two people more diametrically different in how they presented themselves than Pete Pathfinder Davis and Olivia Robertson. They also came from very different backgrounds in their way. As I say, Pete came from a background of law and politics and business, and Olivia came from a background of Anglo-Irish aristocracy. But she tended to present herself as a sweet, slightly dotty old woman, which was not at all what she was. She was a highly intelligent person who understood politics and understood how to get what she wanted, but she tended very often to let people underestimate her, let them think she was just a nice old lady who could not be expected to keep up with developments and situations. But then, if they tried to get one over on her, they found out just how fast she could move. And I have to say, that example came in handy for me several times in life. With that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to take a moment for a word from our sponsors, and I will be right back. And why do we take a moment for a word from our sponsors? Because we love our sponsors.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our next Metaphysical and Magic Auction will be this Friday, February 28th at 7 p.m. Central, and it will be a specifically magical auction. And we'll have some very interesting things for you. I hope you'll join us for that. Now, Corey Judy in the chat room says, if you do a reading, I need one bad. Well, I'm not reading on the show today, but I am available for readings. If you'd like to book a reading, you can DM me on Facebook or email me at donlewishp@aol.com and set one up, or anyone who is interested in the reading. And we are at the start of the year. It's a perfect time for a reading. And I have many, many years' experience. Finally, once again, I want to go back to Rev Don's Book of Stones, Metals, and Crystals. If you're waiting for the ebook copy, you may already have it. If not, you should get it today. If you're waiting for the hard copy, they have been ordered. As soon as they get in, they'll be sent out to you. And I hope that you enjoy them. And if you'd like to order a copy of that book, either the ebook or the hard copy, you can do so at CorellianPublishing.com. And I want to thank you for joining me today. I will be back tomorrow. And tomorrow, my guests will be discussing the subject of divination. And I think you'll find that a fascinating show. Oh, and Judy says, I have you on Patreon. Wonderful. So you can contact me through there also. And thank you, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be the example that helps other people to find a better way through life. Help us to learn from the examples presented to us in life and grow into being the examples ourselves. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you're always with us, we thank you for your presence from respect, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I will